Good. So thank you so much, colleagues. We're going to begin now so that people at home are not getting too jealous of the refreshments that we have on offer here. And it's with great pleasure, real pleasure, that we are about to hear from Joan Laria, who is the CEO of Convergence. We know, Joan, you're extremely busy, and we're so happy to have that you accepted our invitation to speak at this event. And we heard a lot from both the principals about blended finance. And we heard the statement, that left to its own devices, clearly the private sector is not going to deliver the transformation of the cities we require, because it's not happening right now. But we also know that the public sector alone, in the current way that resources are formulated, is not able to do it either, because it's not happening right now. So we need to find a way to mobilize all sources of finance to ensure the transformation of cities for the green transition, the productive transition, and of course the urban transition. And that's what Joan is going to speak to now. So we really look forward to hearing your reflections on cities and blended finance. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank UNCDF and UN Habitat for the opportunity to be part of your event. So we all know the SDG challenge. We're talking about several $1 trillion a year of shortfall in the investment needed in emerging markets and developing economies to actually achieve the SDGs. And we're down to the last 8 years. There is no single party that can do the investing needed to get us there. There's no national government with a budget of several $1 trillion a year that it's going to find to address this issue. There's no municipal government that has a budget line or a tax base that can do this. There's no official donor institution that can pull this off on its own. Even the development banks and the multilateral development banks don't have the cash to achieve the SDGs on their own. Not even Bill Gates does, probably. So the only party in aggregate that has the money to make all of this work in the next 8 years is actually the private sector. There are $3 trillion of assets that change hands in the international financial markets every day. There are a couple hundred trillion, $200 or $300 trillion of financial assets out there. The issue is that the private sector is not mandated to do development. When somebody's managing your pension fund, when somebody's managing your life insurance policy funds, you want them to do the responsible thing with your money. You want them to take the least amount of risk for the most amount of gain. So to get those hundreds of trillions into the game of development, into working on the SDGs, requires a lot of thinking and a lot of new ideas. And one of the tools we have is blended finance, which is simply a structuring device to put catalytic money, the kind of money that donor agencies, development banks, national governments, Bill Gates have, put that kind of money into transactions so that you can get the private sector to invest where it normally would not be willing to go. Hopefully this one works better. Right, so at Convergence, we track blended finance. We are the global network for blended finance. We also try to assist other institutions to try to use the tool more effectively. So what do we know about blended finance writ large in the emerging markets? We know that there's been about $9 billion worth of transactions closed every year. We know that took a huge hit during COVID in 2020. We saw only $4.5 billion of transactions closed that Convergence could see. And we're not at scale. Even forgetting the COVID data for a moment, blended finance is nowhere near being used at the rate and at the scale that it should be to help us achieve our goals under the SDGs. Why is that? Well, first of all, donor institutions lack a strategy. There is no official development agency that has a strategy that's specifically designed to carve out some amount of money and put it into contact with the private sector to deliver additional transactions. They're also not
coordinating with each other on that subject. The development banks and the multilateral development banks, the bilateral development banks, they mobilize and they sometimes use donor resources, but they don't necessarily use donor concessional funds to mobilize third-party money, and so they too are not at scale. There's not enough transparency. Those who have done blended transactions, who have put catalytic money into them, have not actually required there to be a lot of reporting on what the impact was and what the structure was and what the financial outcome was. And without that baseline, you really lack a story to elicit additional catalytic resources toward the same thing. It's really hard to go tell a donor agency to go do more blended finance when nobody has shared any information about how the experience has gone. We at Convergence have the best data, and we can just tell you the broad sketch of what each transaction looks like. There's not a lot of local participation yet. There's an underrepresentation of domestic actors in the field of blended finance, which is something that UNCDF works really hard at correcting. There is so much capital sitting in local sovereign wealth funds, in local pension funds, that could be redirected with a bit of support from blending into some very useful things. So let's look at the urban context for a moment, since that's the subject of today's meeting. We are now, folks, 50 years into a climate crisis. We are 2 years into a global pandemic. We are 2 months into a war that is going to cause severe shocks, among other things, for global food supply chains. So what does that mean for the urban environment? Executive Director Sharif just talked about the urbanization rate. We're at 55% now, we're going to 70% soon. That's going to speed up because people are going to be flocking into the cities in greater numbers because of the things I just mentioned and other factors as well. So cities are going to be straining under those horribly reduced budgets she mentioned to house people, to employ people, to provide basic services to people. So we have a really severe problem when it comes to SDG 11, sustainable cities. If we don't get this right, we're going to be seeing a lot of human misery. That human misery is going to trigger additional climate consequences, and that in turn is a horrible circle back to human misery. We have to do something a little differently. So blended finance for SDG 11, let me tell you what we are seeing happening there, and then what I think the bright light at the end of this tunnel may be. First of all, at Convergence, we have probably the largest data set on blended finance transactions that have closed that we can see and analyze for patterns. We know that 1 in 7 transactions out of the 700 or so that we have recorded in some manner addresses SDG 11. That's about 39 transactions. We know that's about $42 billion worth of money that has closed in those deals. And they're interesting. They're affordable housing bonds. They are street lighting projects. They're water and transport projects. And about 45% of them have happened over the years. This is over the past, decade or so. About 45% of them have closed in sub-Saharan Africa. That is the target destination of the transaction. And the rest are scattered throughout the world. So these projects have some interesting features. They happen to be, in many cases, a recognizable asset class. Now, when you're talking about moving private capital around, having something that looks familiar is a pretty good start. People have a really hard time investing in, say, natural capital or elementary education, but they have a really much easier time when you start talking about municipal bonds or corporate bonds. So that's really a helpful start for using blended finance for our city's agenda. We also have a really good opportunity here to engage local parties, that is, the municipalities themselves, national governments themselves, but also those local pension funds that I mentioned, the local sovereign wealth funds. They have a better inherent ability to assess the risk in their home market. and they have the right flavor of money. We're talking about local currency as opposed to introduction of foreign currency risk. So if I were to conclude here, I would say that blended finance, again, I'm telling you, we're not at the right scale for the calamities that we're looking at. We do have a promising SDG here. SDG 11 is an interesting one for blended finance. We need to organize, we need to rally and do things differently, and time is of the essence. We've got 8 years to 2030, and we are out of time on reaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set out. So my suggestions for all of us as we talk around these issues today is, number one, let's not reinvent. Let's not get too innovative. Let's use what has worked before in some other context, in some other sector, in some other city, in some other country. And let's make blended finance large, repetitive, and boring. So unlike the rest of this morning, which I really look forward to and I know will not be boring. So I want to thank all of you and pass the mic back to my colleague.
Thank you very much indeed, Joan. That was a very inspirational, I think a very thoughtful set of comments. Highly appreciated from our side. And it's, I would like to endorse your point about making blended finance boring. And I hope through SDG cities and the city investment facility in 15 to 20 years time, people will be saying, well, that was obvious. Why hadn't we done that before? And we'll be looking at cities that are urbanized at scale, but in a green, inclusive way that are able to fulfill their promise as places of social progress, which cities have traditionally been, but slipping back a little bit now. They're not quite the place of social progress they once were. So I think that is a really great agenda that you've laid out there. We'll be discussing it in the panel now between now and 9:30, and then we have two keynote speakers from the Inter-American Development Bank and from the European Union, who have also provided a lot of thought to this process that you have described. I'd like to highlight a couple of elements that you spoke about. I really appreciate the focus on domestic finance. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to the Financing for Development agenda and the Addis Ababa Action agenda. It's not only about bringing international capital to emerging markets. It's also about transforming those emerging markets and their domestic capital markets so that they can meet the needs of those countries. And of course, one of the big advantages in some places of a strong and deep domestic capital market is the ability to have blended finance instruments, bond markets that can finance sustainable infrastructure that cities need. And I think we need to have a blend as well of domestic and international as part of the blended finance agenda. And unless we can get that, we won't get the capital at the right price. Because it's partly about at the right price to make an investment transformative. So I think that's really excellent remarks. What we're going to do now is go to our first panel that in many ways will be responding to the remarks made by Joan. And we have an additional speaker as well. We're very delighted that the mayor of Kumasi, Ghana, I understand, has agreed to join online. Now, this is a huge, thank you so much, Honorable Mayor, and this is a huge benefit to this meeting because Kumasi, Ghana is one of the cities where the principles that Joan has talked about will be now put into practice through the International Municipal Investment Fund. There are discussions with the city of Kumasi regarding a light rapid transport system, the kind of mass transit that is needed in many of these cities, of course, that have populations now that really require that kind of investment that has hitherto not arrived. So I suggest what we do is, in terms of the panel, given that the Honourable Mayor is online, if you're there, Honourable Mayor, we'll move to you first for your comments in response to what you've heard so far this morning. And then we will move to the speakers we have in the room after hearing from those online. Honourable Mayor, are you there? If so,
yes, hello.
The floor is yours.
Yes. Yeah, so it's fortunate Honorable Mayor could not join because he had some flight problems. So he has asked Director of Planning for KMA, to stand in for him. So he sincerely apologized to everyone for his inability to join. So for the discussion so far, I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear. Please introduce yourself and then make the remarks you would like to make on behalf of the mayor. We can hear you.
Hello. Yes. So for the discussion so far, for Kumasi Metropolitan Assembly, one of the key development challenges that we are facing happen to be with congestion of the CBD. The resource is because of the number of issues, and then one of them has to be with the inadequate terminals and stopping places for commercial activities, and then also encroachment of the streets and then the walkways by hawkers and other traders who come to the CBD, and then the use of small size vehicles for public transport, making it unsafe and unattractive to certain passengers. So these are some of the problems that has caused the congestion at the CBD. And then the assembly or the city intends to use 3-pronged approaches to be able to address this problem holistically. So what we are looking at is construction of multi-story car parks to be able to provide enough parking spaces for the private cars and then some commercial vehicles. And also improving the quality of satellite markets to attract some businesses and shoppers from the center of the city. And then lastly, the most important of it all for the discussion, the introduction of bus rapid transit. The reason being that these 3 approaches, we think that the 3 they are complementary projects in nature. Because looking at our city now, without the introduction of the car park, to be able to take away the cars from the streets, there is no way we can introduce the BRT. And then the hawking situation, the marketing on the street is also so large. So we need to be able to construct the market to take away some of the trading activities from the center. Unfortunately, our contact with the UNCDF, they have provided us with the technical support to prepare feasibility studies for the car park projects and then also for the market projects. These feasibility studies are almost ready. And as soon as they are ready,
we've lost you. Samuel, we seem to have lost you. Okay, we'll give you 1 moment to reconnect. Otherwise, we will have to move to the second speaker. But Samuel, I really appreciate the comments you made about the bus rapid transport system and the way in which we're able now to bring a blended solution to address that. I mean, we heard from Joan about the critical importance of getting the blend right. In this particular case, we're looking at some form of equity as a large part.
Yes, so sorry about that.
Okay, please continue.
Yes, sorry, it's a network issue. So the point making that the UNCDF is supporting the city to prepare feasibility studies to establish the bankability of those projects. And after that, we forward those proposals of feasibility studies to the International Municipal Investment Fund to secure funding for this project. And then for the last bit of it, the BRT, the bus rapid transport to the city has support from the African Development Bank. And then we have done the full feasibility studies for the BRT, which some critical routes has been identified as viable corridors. And then as we speak now, the UNCDF is also supporting the city to be able to secure funding for the construction of this car park, either through for the construction of the BRT, either through PPP or direct funding or loan as well. So this is where we have gotten to. So we think that for now, the UNCDF is supporting immensely in an approach to be able to address the congestion of our city. So we are by looking at these 3 main projects. And apart from that, the UNCDF is also supporting us to improve upon our revenue collection. So we have in place the projects that we are about starting. We have 6 core activities that we are going to implement that will support the city to improve its revenue generation, to be able to support the implementation of the above project. So we, in the initial, this is what I will say for now, respect to the support, the technical support from the UNCDF towards the Kumasi in our bid to be able to decongest our city as part of the processes in order to be able to achieve SDG 11. Yes, thank you for now.
Thank you so much indeed for those comments. I think that's a very important statement about this very large, significant investment in mass transit that will be taking place in Kumasi, Ghana, due to the kind of ecosystem for blended finance for cities that was discussed by the 2 principals. Now, we're running very short of time, so I'm going to make some quite drastic changes to the agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to go very quickly to Honorable Kasim Namagoli, the Mayor of Mbali, who is going to talk. Perhaps if you could try to limit your remarks to literally 2 to 3 minutes, just the main bullet points, Honorable Mayor, on the work you're doing to increase your own source revenue, which is one fundamental part of the blended finance. And then immediately after that, we're going to Mr. Alawi Ahmed, who will talk very briefly, I think it may be again 2 to 3 minutes, just the bullet points of the Tanga water bond, which will be the first ever in local currency financed municipal infrastructure bond in Tanzania, floated on the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange and hoping to be subscribed by pension funds from the SADC region. That's exactly the kind of instrument that's referred to by both the principals and by Joan in her comments. But both colleagues, if you could just give the bullet points, and then we're going to have a very quick discussion with a couple of people online, and then we'll go to Paolo Ciccarelli, who is the head of Unit 4 at the European Commission, INPA, which looks at municipal finance, urban finance infrastructure. And we'll also hear from Vinicio Stort, the head of investments at the Inter-American Development Bank. There'll be no time for discussions, I don't think, but who knows if we can get through this quickly. So I'm going to ask, please, first, Honorable Mayor of Mbali, literally 2 minutes, just the bullet points of what you want to say to add to this discussion, and then we'll go immediately to Alawi Ahmed from the Tanga Urban Water Supply and Sanitation Authority. So, Honorable Mayor Kasim from Mbali, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. I think in the interest of time, we'll just make an outline, but I want to appreciate so far what I've heard from especially our UN Executive Director, UN Habitat, of course, indicated the issues to do with the population pressure, and that is not an exception to Mbali in particular and Uganda, meaning that there is a lot of pressure on issues of service delivery, the demands for services, utilities, the demand for the infrastructure in terms of health facilities. There is a lot of demand for issues to do with the services in the hospitals and all that. So in all this, it requires the funding from the center definitely is quite little, and therefore drives us to try as much as possible to focus on automation, because the manual collection have their own temptations and it becomes quite difficult for us to do it. There is sensitization and also reduction in terms of political balancing politics, support, and then increasing their revenues. In most cases, of course, the taxation and all these issues that are deterrent, especially when it comes to sourcing for votes from voters, and then you want to balance that with increasing revenue, losing votes here and there. Our main sources, of course, focus on service fees, fines and violations. They focus on the charges and taxes, and then the asset monetization. Basically, when you talk about service fees, we're talking about increasing the business licenses, issues to do with the land registration, development permits, and all that. in fines, we of course look at the building for people who build without permits. Those are people who crisscross on our greening areas, the islands. Issues to do with the public health and then all that. So the demands in terms of, as the population pressure increases, there are issues to do with the solid waste management as a challenge. So all this require us to do partnership. We are doing loans, but sometimes our balance sheet does not support us to get the amount that would actually support big projects. So it therefore means that while we go in, but whatever we get may not be enough to support us in terms of huge projects, especially when it comes to road infrastructure. Of course, we would want to do say that we generate revenue from those who are publicly parking on our roads. So having them improved and doing well would mean that the income of the city will increase. So here we would need some huge amount to support our roads, improve on them, support the lighting system. So in doing all this, it would therefore mean that as we get people parking on our roads that have been improved, we are increasing our own revenue in a way, and that one supports our other areas. We're also pushing for partnership in terms of public-private partnership in terms of waste management and the other areas, including managing our own assets. Those are some of the areas where we are pushing to increase our own revenue. But definitely doing all this, given the projects that we are talking about, this may not really give us fair support to do the road network, to do the health facilities, to do the schools. So a lot of support would definitely be required. What would be interesting is that
Honourable Mayor,
a very opportunity to make decisions. Yes, sir.
Honourable Mayor, I'm afraid I'm going to cut you off at this point purely because of the time, but I want to thank you so much for the comments you've made and the emphasis you have put on own source revenue as a key component of this blend of finance. I'm hoping we're going to be able to come round for a second round at the closing, so I'll be able to bring you back in at that point. Thank you so much indeed, Honourable Mayor, and I'd now like to give the floor to Alawi Ahmed, who is the project manager of the Tanga Urban Water Supply and Sanitation Authority, who will talk very briefly about a domestic bond to be floated on the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange, the Tanga Water Bond. And this very much complements what we've heard from the Honourable Mayor of Mbali in Uganda, because you need both sides of this coin. You need to improve own source revenue, as we've just heard from the Honourable Mayor, and you need to be able to use that kind of public financial management base to give you the credibility to launch the kind of capital market instruments that we're about to hear from now. So Alawi Ahmed, again, the key bullet points you want to mention on the Tanga Water Bond. Over to you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much indeed, Honourable Mayor Kasim. Highly appreciate your time and your understanding.
Oh, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Basically, what I'm here to do is to give experience of endeavor of securing or issuing a corporate bond for the purpose of facilitating the investment infrastructure development. We were faced with the challenge of a growing population, as others have spoken about the growing population vis-a-vis the ungrowing capacity for water production and distribution, and that couples with the insufficiency of financing capacity to do all those initiatives, big initiatives. So we accessed the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange for a possibility to use the avenue of issuing a bond, a corporate bond, to be able to secure a much bigger financing, unlike what we've been doing to invest in small packets using corporate loans. So we are currently undergoing stages into development of the specific bond. It's a revenue green bond for the purpose of securing around $23 million US to facilitate the implementation of the bigger projects, which will cater for demand for water for up to maybe 2025, at least, to be able to reduce the challenge that is facing us now and in the near future. So we are in a good stage. We are currently working with UNCDF Tanzania to design or to craft that bond to float it in the Russian Stock Exchange after the registration of the Capital Market and Security Authority. And then we will go forward with the advantage of using a bond as alternative source of financing for project development is that you can get much big amount of money than using corporate loans. So this is our experience in a nutshell. Maybe some questions will come later. If there will be questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, and highly appreciate your brevity. So I think we're starting to hear now about the pieces of the jigsaw that are required to bring this blend together. You know, it's like a smoothie. A blend is, you know, you put it in a blender and you mix it up, and it will taste differently depending on the different blend of fruits you put in. And of course, each city will require its own specific bespoke blend. And I think that's one of the things that we're hearing from this discussion so far. A lot of these issues have already been debated and studied, and there are two reports I'd like to draw your attention to, and I'm going to ask Amadou to put the links in the chat box for those online. There is the European Union UN Habitat Financing Sustainable Urban Development Report that was published recently, and it highlights all these issues. The advisory committee chaired by Sir Paul Collier from the University of Oxford, and it really brings out some of the key issues that were discussed by the two principals in the opening ceremony. Secondly, there is the Local Government Finance is Development Finance report, which has been published very recently. I'm asking Amadou to put that in the chat box too. And that really builds on the Financing for Sustainable Urban Development report and looks at some of the slightly more innovative approaches that can be followed in terms of changing the way this ecosystem works, as was mentioned earlier, and moving away from sovereign borrowing as the answer, because that's not going to raise enough money, and trying to look at opening up sub-sovereign capital markets and looking again at intergovernmental fiscal transfers as a tool, as a development tool to meet the SDGs. So if you could put those two links in the chat box for colleagues to be able to pick up. And now, thank you so much. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll ask Joan to take the floor there, and I'm going to invite our next two panelists. But thank you, Joan. A quick round of applause. And thank you, panelists, so far. So we're now going to turn to Emile Maihara, who is the Deputy Executive Director of FMDV, which is a French acronym, Fund Mondial de Ville, the city's investment fund, effectively, and Mohamed Abadi, who is the Senior Investment Manager at the UN Capital Development Fund, and will be working with David Aubrey, who you'll be hearing from later, and all the colleagues in both this new fused team of UN Habitat and UNCDF on support to these transactions. Of course, we have our technical partner, FMDV, that's also part of this team. So it's a family we are creating, really, because when you sign up with UNCDF, you also get FMDV as part of the deal, because we also work very closely with FMDV to support cities, and some of the work that has been referred to so far has also benefited from FMDV's support. So I know you've both prepared speeches or presentations, so I'm going to surprise you a little bit, but I think it'll be good, and given the time, to have a bit of a discussion. So first, I'd like to give the floor to Emile and just ask you for reflections you might have on what you've heard so far, and how we can really tailor our support to make this kind of blended finance arrangements friendly to cities, because a lot of you hear a lot about bring the private sector in, etc., but that's not always on a city-friendly basis, and it's not always what works for transformative projects in cities. It might work for a shopping mall, but that might work for a hotel, but those are not necessarily transformative projects. So through FMDB and through your long experience and the experience of FMDB, any reflections on that? How we can, and the work we're already doing together, for example, with Chef Schwen and other cities, how we can make sure that this support is city-friendly. That's the question I'd like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. So I'm Emily Mayara, the Deputy Executive Director of the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV. I'd like to recall first that we are an international network of local governments, and we are specialized in developing solutions for financing and investment in cities. And thank you. Is it okay? Okay, thank you. So to answer your question, first, I'd like to recall that we are faced with a systemic failure of subnational finance markets because the money is available on the one hand, and on the other hand, many mayors and local governments have projects, but the two cannot connect. So why is that? It is mainly due to inappropriate institutional frameworks, a lack of capacity, expertise, or creditworthiness of local governments, but it's also because their projects are below the level of investment of public and private investors and thus not considered as bankable. So this is one of the characteristics of the subnational finance markets. So for these reasons, when we talk about financing cities, we need to engage in an approach that mobilizes the whole ecosystems of stakeholders, as discussed this morning. And we need to rely on specific policies and instruments that imply all this ecosystem. I'd like to quote two of them, if you allow me. First, I'd like to present the work we've been doing with several national governments in order to develop national programs on financing urban development, such as in South Africa, Ivory Coast, Morocco, or Uganda. The implication of the national level is really critical to develop national policies, create the enabling environment, build the necessary capacities and structure pipelines of bankable projects ready to be presented to investors. Without the involvement of the national level, it will be very difficult to stay focused only at the project level because of all the issues I mentioned earlier. And we see when we at FMDV support these national programs that there is a real interest from DFIs that want to have this dialogue with the national government. And also, this kind of national commitments allow to support all the cities, including intermediary cities, through providing a kind of expertise hubs to support project preparation and their connection to financing. So it allows very small cities to be supported by this technical and financial expertise at the national level. And it works very well. We have very good examples, for instance, in Morocco, focused on climate finance. The second solution I'd like to highlight to support, to answer the needs of cities is also based on mobilizing another very key stakeholder, which are subnational development banks. In fact, they are public development banks or national institutions with the mandate to finance local governments, and they are being recognized by the new urban agenda as key stakeholders to unlock financing at the subnational level, because they have this intermediation mandate focused on the subnational level, and it gives very good results. For instance, in Brazil, we see several subnational development banks that are able to finance 500 municipalities at one time through only one credit line from a DFI. So one credit line, 500 municipalities financed. It's really impressive. And this is the reason why at FMDB, we've been supporting the recognition of subnational development banks, but also we've been facilitating 2 regional alliances of SDGs in Africa and in Latin America as part of the Finance in Common Summit, which is the global summit gathering 500 public development banks. And we also provide technical assistance to individual subnational development banks in order to support them enlarging and developing new and reinforced technical and financial services to local governments. And we provide all these supports through policy dialogues, reinforcing capacities, and developing pipelines of projects. And I'd like here to highlight, to recognize the growing partnership with UNCDF. And we have developed several programs in different regions of the world. For instance, in Southeast Asia, we support. Okay, so I'll stop here, but I'd like just to say that in order to bridge the subnational financing gap, solutions do exist, and we need to scale them up in order to finance the SDGs and the new urban agenda within this decade for action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Emile. Really highly appreciated those remarks. And Mohammed, how are we going to be able to support cities using UNCDF's various instruments, and including, of course, the International Municipal Investment Fund, which is an instrument developed together with United Cities and Local Government and FMDB. Any brief reflections from your side, and in particular, the technical assistance that can be provided through the team, now the FUSE team with UN Habitat, that is available? And you have literally 90 seconds or so, my friend. Thank you.
So very quickly, so I think this is the heart of the FUSE offering between UN Habitat and UNCDF. We, at the City Investment Facility and the way it's designed, we work to identify investments and projects working with cities through decades of relationships, that in a way whereby we identify investments that are not necessarily bankable, because bankability doesn't mean sustainability, and sustainability doesn't mean transformation. We aim for transformative investments that are financially sustainable, impactful, and they're able to transform local economies by looking at utilizing a team of financial advisors. They're able to help the cities to structure these investments in ways and means that they can bring that transformative impact on the ground and also maintain the financial sustainability. Number two, we bring a whole box of financial toolbox and advisory attached to it in order to de-risk these investments and make them appealing to investors, and walk them actually through specific pathways, David, that are very suitable to the cities, terms and conditions that are acceptable to the cities, but also attractive to investors. And these pathways include specific tracks for international investors, for domestic investors, for regional investors, and de-risking instruments, including, for example, UNCDF's own lending platform that provides very concessional loans, guarantees, reimbursable grants, and capital grants in order to shape up these investment at a level that is investment ready. And that is really where the market is suffering, David, in my opinion. There's a lot of pipelines of projects, but there is very lack of investment ready projects that are at a ready stage for investors and for the city to be able to present. That is the value proposition that we jointly bring in, that decade of collaboration with the cities, that the normative urban agenda with the climate, with the inclusiveness, UNCDF's financial toolbox and instrument, our ability to structure, our ability to de-risk, and utilize our own funds in order to unlock domestic and international finance. And we are growingly employing a cadre of partners in terms of international financiers, regional investors, and domestic investors to join forces with the City Investment Facility to become solution for the cities, because at the end, it is a whole ecosystem that needs to be unlocked.
Very clear, Mohammed. Thank you so much indeed. I appreciate as well the way you were able to capture that nugget, the key issue of making investments financeable and transformable, not just bankable. And I think that's what you were talking about. But the word bankable is not necessarily the most helpful word when it comes to mayors and cities. It's how can we transform the city and how can we finance that transformation? That will include bankable projects. It will also include other things too. And it will include various kinds of blended finance to make that finance sustainable in terms of repayments, etc. So thank you so much. We've almost recuperated the time thanks to the very flexible panel. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Paolo Ciccarelli, who is from INPA in the EU Commission, and who has actually been one of the pioneers in driving this whole agenda through the Financing Sustainable Urban Development Advisory Group and report that came out. So we're very grateful to you, Paolo, for your inspiration when it comes to seeing the importance of urbanization, infrastructure, and the new urban agenda as part of the broader development imperative. So the floor is yours, Paolo.
Thank you, David. I hope that you can hear me clearly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I see that we have a very short time to discuss this, but basically, without going back to all the analysis on the challenge of the implementation of SDGs, I will go directly to a little bit what is the vision of the European Union being one of the major donors, let's say, in the development arena. And I would like to say that we are now in the beginning of our financing framework period that goes from 2021 to 2027. And basically, we have since we have this big budget to manage, and we have also quite a lot of human resource. We are, I would say, very strong in having a kind of double entry point for our international cooperation. The first one, which is probably the most important, is an entry point at country level, because our program is heavily geographized. So we are really managing national and regional programs, which are quite big as a portfolio. And this entry point at national level allow us to enter in policy dialogue at national and subnational level with governments, but also with mayors and local authorities. And when we come back specifically to urban development, we have about 30 countries in the world that are working in initiative at urban level, which is very important, because this means that these countries see urbanization and urban development as a clear challenge to address. The second entry point is a global level, and at global level we have the capacity to make analysis, studies, pilot project, and this is where basically we came out with the study that we coordinated with UN Habitat and UNCDF. And so, to make an example, basically, to make clear this process, we have been looking at these three areas of urban planning as a way to improve investment. 3 points: urban planning as a way to improve investment, the need for raising domestic revenues, and then the third, strengthening the access to external financing. So basically, through developing these areas at let's say analytical way, then we will be able to push this in the 30 countries where we have more or less this interest in urban development. And so basically we combine these this double entry point of national level and global level. The other things that I want to mention briefly is that also we have a lot of instruments at our disposal, because the policy dialogue we do through, let's say, technical assistance, but also to budget support. We directly support the budget of the countries in actually implementing reforms, implementing policy change, implementing the decentralization process, and so basically allowing the subnational level to raise domestic revenues. And together with this, we have, of course, also other, let's say, more conventional programs like thematic programs. But the one that I would like to mention is especially our European Development Funds, Sustainable Funds, what we call EFSD+, because this is basically mobilize a lot of grants to help blending resources, so basically blending grants with loans, and also a big guarantee scheme that is used to de-risk the system and to facilitate investments. And this guarantee scheme, a part of it is open to private sector, and we divide this in windows, and there is also a specific window for cities. A call for proposal is coming very soon. Basically, the European financing institution will be entitled to present a proposal for these windows, where there is also a guarantee windows for cities, and of course the financing institution will do this in coordination with the private sector, because the main focus on this is to raise, let's say, also private sector funding for this project. So basically, the typical structure of this is that there will be a program with the equity from private sector. There will be a loan from a financing institution, and then there will be a guarantee from the European Commission that will de-risk all the operation. I don't know. I could say more, but I will stop here in case. I am ready to go more deeper in the debate. Thank you to you, David.
Thank you so much indeed, Paolo. That's really encouraging, because now we're starting to see this window opening up for cities to start to access these kind of enablers of blended finance that you spoke about. So that's hugely encouraging, Paolo, and thank you so much for those comments. And I think it's putting into practice, some of the lessons that come out of the two reports that we have been discussing recently. And so we also have another development finance institution with us, and this is Mr. Vinicio Stort, who is the head of investments at the Inter-American Development Bank. So I'd like to give you the floor, Vinicio, again, very briefly, given the fact that we're almost at the end, but just for a couple of thoughts from your side, from the perspective of the Inter-American Development Bank, of what we've heard so far. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you. A special thanks for UN Habitat and let me myself. Very good. The word here that's being presented by many people is coordination and joint efforts. And I am right now at IDB Invest, which is the private sector of the Inter-American Development Bank group. But for the last 3 years, I was in a subnational bank in Brazil. And before that, I was in China in a large supranational. And before that, I spent 15 years in Washington. And I'm going to give a very quick example of something that worked in Brazil. And I think Emily might have mentioned that before. And it ties up the whole coordination of financial funds or the stream of finance that helped developing the urban agenda. And that coordination was in Minas Gerais. It's one of the largest states in Brazil where the bank that I used to work operates. And that state has 853 small, most of them are small towns. And it was very difficult for any bank sitting in Washington or Shanghai or New York to tackle. So that example was important because we were able to get a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank, the private sector. So the state is broke, could not get a sovereign lending, but was able to get a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank private sector, transform that into a line that was digitally put for cities in coordination and in a transparent way, do two things: help to create a project preparation facility that attract capital from private sector, but also to provide finance that was profitable to small cities in a standardized way. So that example for me, it touches my development heart, let's say, because it can really ties in an effective way all the elements of the stream of funds from multilaterals, the supranationals, into the granular level in Brazil, and it could be something that expanded in other places. But I don't want to extend too much. I'll be very happy to share the details of that. But my message here that I want to share is the coordination is key. Nobody like John and others, David, everybody mentioned that no one is able to tackle the financial gap for urban development. So it requires a strong coordination, and in events like this and in discussions like this can open up the ability to export or to share experiences that worked in one place to another, because time is on the matter. And then John mentioned very, very well, we cannot reinvent that much because we don't have the time to do it. So I want to leave my intervention here today on those terms. There's, like many mentioned, there are ways for us to catalyze development in urban development with a ton of coordination, and relying on digital platforms, de-risking mechanisms, because the standard tools might work for large cities, but standardization and coordination really help the small ones. And this is what worked in Brazil and might work in other places. So I'm going to leave like that for time being, and thank again David, DFAT, and everybody for having me in this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. And you, without knowing it, you actually did a really good segue to the final speaker, who is just going to touch base with us briefly on one of these tools you referred to that can be really useful for smaller cities that we hope we can make available through this fused offering. And I'd like to ask Leonard Fleck, just literally in 60 seconds or so, to talk about the rapid own source revenue analysis tool, which again can provide this common base for cities to start to be able to approach institutions like yours. And then we will have a closing. So Leonard, if you're online, the floor is yours and thank you so much for your patience. And thank you, everybody. We're just about going to finish it in time. Over to you, Leonard.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'll try to be very brief. So essentially, UN Habitat has been developing a tool to help local governments self-optimize their OSR, their own source revenues. The tool will be launched in the course of the year, and it will provide a scalable way to build the capacity of local governments. Essentially, it uses literature and data on own source revenues to come up with analysis and help cities prioritize reform interventions. Cities usually know the challenges that they face in optimizing OSR, but they may have challenges in prioritizing the reforms that may deliver the most buck for the bang for the reform buck. So a lot could be said about this tool, but thank you for the opportunity just to share a very brief glimpse on it, and I look forward to sharing it with some people in the course of the year. Thanks very much, David. Back to you.
No, well, thank you so much indeed, Leonard. And I think the beauty of this fused offering, this fused programmatic offering, is that we'll now be able to work across the globe, really, bringing together these various tools. There are many others that we have not discussed at this meeting today on inclusion, and bringing together these various pipelines, the work we do with United Cities and Local Governments and FMDV on the International Municipal Investment Fund, the work that UN Habitat is doing on the Emerging Markets Infrastructure Fund, and there are many, many more. So through this fused offering, we'll be able to consolidate a city-oriented pipeline, which I think is a huge advance. So from my side, I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to give the floor to my friend and colleague, David Aubrey, who will close the meeting on behalf of UN Habitat. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you everyone for being here as well as online. I think this is an exciting moment for us. UN Habitat, we've been very much involved with policy, planning, and trying to get that sort of upstream level of impact in cities. And now by working with UNCDF and going to the to the last mile of impact by being able to finance. And I think what we also recognize from this session is that it's an ecosystem really of finance. I think every part has their role, from development banks and local banks and various experts along the line. And I think as we move forward, we're looking forward to moving forward as a sort of an ecosystem of partners where each one has their role. So thanks very much for being here. I'm sorry the event's been hurried, but thanks, David, for being able to keep everything on time and on track. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you. Maybe just ask Amadou to save the chat. We had some really good comments in the chat box. So Amadou or Nan, please save the chat there. And thank you very much, everybody online. Please don't forget to save the chat. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Congratulations.